December 20th, 1968. A quiet lover's lane on Lake Herman Road, just on the edge of Benicia, California. For high school students, David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen, it was supposed to be their first real date, a pre-Christmas celebration, simple and innocent. But as the night grew darker, so did the fate awaiting them. That evening ended not with a goodnight kiss, but with the cold, calculated violence of an unknown predator. This wasn't just a tragic crime. It was the opening act of a reign of terror that would grip Northern California and baffle our law enforcement for decades. This was the birth of the Zodiac killer. What makes this case so haunting is how it began with a seemingly motiveless attack on two teenagers. There was no robbery, no apparent personal connection, just brutal, swift violence. David was shot once in the head. Betty Lou, who tried to flee, was shot 5 times in the back. The local police were stumped. In a time before advanced forensic science, they had little to go on. The crime scene was a puzzle with most of its pieces missing. Who would do this, and why? The community was in shock, but they couldn't have imagined this was only the beginning. Fast forward almost 7 months to July 4th, 1969. Another lover's lane, this time at Blue Rock Springs, Park in Vallejo, only a few miles from the first crime scene. Darlene Farron and Michael Mago were sitting in their car when another vehicle pulled up behind them, its headlights blinding them. A man approached, flashlight in hand. He walked to the passenger side window and, without a word, opened fire. He shot them both multiple times before calmly walking back to his car and driving away. But this time, there was a survivor. Michael Mejia, despite being shot in the face, neck, and chest, miraculously survived. He provided the first real description of the attacker. A short, heavy-set, white male with a large face. The terror, however, was about to escalate. Less than an hour after the shooting, a chilling phone call was made to the Vallejo Police Department. A man's calm, monotone voice claimed responsibility not only for the attack that night, but also for the murders of David Fair and Betty Lou Jensen the previous December. The message was clear and terrifying. I also killed those kids last year. You will find them out on Lake Herman Road. I am the killer. This call changed everything. It connected two brutal, seemingly random crimes. It gave the faceless killer a voice, and it marked the moment the public learned they were dealing with someone who was not just a murderer, but a manipulator who craved attention. He wasn't just taking lives. He was orchestrating a public spectacle of fear. The police now knew they weren't investigating isolated incidents. They were hunting a serial killer, but the killer wasn't content with just a phone call. He wanted more. On August 1st, 1969, 3 major Bay Area newspapers, the Vallejo Times-Herald, the San Francisco Chronicle, and the San Francisco Examiner each received a handwritten letter. The letters contained details only the killer could know, proving their authenticity. But they also contained something else. A bizarre 3-park crypto, a 408-symbol cipher that, according to the writer, held his identity. And then came the demand. The killer ordered the newspapers to publish his cipher on their front pages. If they didn't comply by the afternoon of Friday, August 1st, he would go on a kill rampage. It was a terrifying ultimatum. The letters were also signed with a strange cross-circle symbol, a mark that would soon become synonymous with fear across the nation. And for the first time, he gave himself a name. In a letter sent just days later, he began with the now infamous words, "This is the Zodiac speaking." The name stuck. The Zodiac killer had branded himself. He was no longer just a shadow in a lover's lane. He was a media phantom, a puzzle master, taunting the police and the public. The Bay Area was gripped by a new kind of fear. The randomness of the attacks meant anyone could be next. The killer was a ghost who could be anywhere. Anyone. The ciphers added a layer of intellectual horror to the physical violence. The first cipher was cracked, not by the FBI or police cryptographers, but by a high school history teacher, Donald Hardin, and his wife, Betty. They worked tirelessly over a weekend, driven by the public plea for help. The decoded message was not a confession or a name. It was a rambling, misspelled tirade that revealed a deeply disturbed mind. It read, in part, "I like killing people because it is so much fun. It is more fun than killing wild game in the forest because man is the most dangerous animal of all. He claimed he was collecting slaves for the afterlife. The solution to the puzzle only deepened the mystery and the dread. It offered a glimpse into his twisted psychology but brought police no closer to his identity. The police response in these early days was a frantic scramble. Different jurisdictions, Benicia, Vallejo, and later Napa County and San Francisco had to learn to coordinate, but the Zodiac was always one step ahead. He controlled the narrative, feeding clues and threats to the media, turning his horrific crimes into a public game. Witness accounts were sparse and sometimes conflicting. The description from Michael Mago was their best lead, but it was a generic one. Thousands of men in the Bay Area could fit that description. The Zodiac's first attacks established the terrifying pattern that would define his criminal career. Brutal, seemingly random strikes, followed by taunting communications with the press and police. He created a persona, a monster for the media age. He wasn't just killing people. He was crafting his own dark legend, one that would be written in blood, ink, and unsolved ciphers. These initial murders on Lake Herman Road and at Blue Rock Springs were the foundation of that legend. They plunged Northern California into a nightmare, a real-life horror story where the killer wrote the script, and everyone else was forced to play their part. The terror was just beginning, and the Zodiac was far from finished. His most audacious crimes were yet to come. This wasn't just a killer. This was a performer who used the media as his stage and fear as his script. He craved attention, and through a terrifying campaign of letters, ciphers, and threats, he held Northern California in a grip of terror for years. It all began in August of 1969. 3 different newspapers, the San Francisco Chronicle, the San Francisco Examiner, and the Vallejo Times-Herald each received a handwritten letter. The author claimed responsibility for 2 recent shootings and provided details only the killer could know. But this was more than a confession. Each letter contained one part of a 3-part cipher. The killer demanded the papers publish his coded message on their front pages, or he would go on a killing rampage that weekend. This was his opening act, a brilliant and horrifying way to ensure he got exactly what he wanted. Publicity. The papers complied, and a terrified public was introduced to the Zodiac. The first cipher, known as the Z408, was cracked within a week, not by law enforcement, but by a high school teacher and his wife, Donald and Betty Harden. They were amateur cryptographers who saw the challenge in the newspaper and got to work. The decoded message was a rambling, misspelled tirade. The killer talked about how much he enjoyed killing people, claiming it was more fun than hunting animals in the forest. He believed that all the people he killed would become his slaves in the afterlife. The message ended with the chilling words, "I will not give you my name." This was our first glimpse into the disturbed mind of the killer, someone who saw murder as a sport and was building a twisted vision of his own paradise. Just a few months later, in October 1969, the Zodiac struck again, this time murdering a taxi driver named Paul Stein in San Francisco. This was a brazen attack in a busy neighborhood. But he didn't just flee. He took a piece of Stein's blood-soaked shirt. A few days later, a letter arrived at the San Francisco Chronicle. It began with the now infamous line, "This is the Zodiac speaking." Inside was a piece of that bloody shirt, undeniable proof that the letter writer was the killer. He mocked the police for their incompetence, claiming they had even stopped and spoken to him shortly after the murder, but let him go. This act of sending a piece of the victim's clothing was a power move, a way to prove his authenticity and to taunt the authorities with his untouchability. Then came the next major puzzle. In November 1969, the Zodiac sent another letter, this one containing a new, much more complex cipher. It was a grid of 340 symbols, and he titled it, "My Name Is." This became known as the Z340 cipher. For decades, it was the holy grail for codebreakers, both professional and amateur. The FBI, the NSA, and countless armchair detectives tried and failed to crack it. It seemed like the Zodiac had finally created an unbreakable code, one that held the key to his identity. The promise was tantalizing. "If you can solve this, you'll know who I am." It was a direct challenge to the world, and for 51 years, the world failed. Imagine the frustration. For over half a century, this jumble of symbols sat there, a silent monument to the killer's intellect and ego. Theories swirled. Was it a hoax? Was it just gibberish, or was it a perfectly constructed puzzle waiting for the right mind to unlock it? People dedicated their lives to it. The mystery of the Z340 became almost as famous as the murders themselves. It was the ultimate taunt, a secret the Zodiac took to his grave, or so it say mad. Then, in December 2020, the impossible happened. A team of 3 amateur codebreakers from around the world, David Orenschok, a software developer from Virginia, Sam Blake, an applied mathematician from Australia, and Jarl van Eyck. The decoded message read, in part, I hope you're having lots of fun in trying to catch me. That wasn't me on the TV show. I'm not afraid of the gas chamber because it will send me to paradise all the sooner because I now have enough slaves to work for me. The TV show is a reference to a televised call-in program where someone claiming to be the Zodiac had called in. Once again, he was correcting the public record, controlling his own narrative. The message confirmed he was still obsessed with the idea of an afterlife filled with slaves. And most disappointingly, he once again declared, I am not afraid. No name, no confession. Just more of the same arrogant defiance. The great secret was just another middle finger from the past. But the Zodiac wasn't just about complex ciphers. He also used simple, eerie symbols that became his brand. The most famous is the crosshairs symbol, a circle with a cross through it. He signed his letters with it. He left it at crime scenes. It was his signature, his logo. What did it mean? Some would think eat. As a rifle scope, a symbol of his view of people as targets. Others have suggested it's a parody of a watch brand's logo, or that it has some occult meaning. Whatever its origin, it was incredibly effective. When people saw that symbol, they knew exactly who it was from. It was the 1960s equivalent of a terrifying viral brand. The letters themselves were a masterclass in psychological warfare. The handwriting was often erratic, sometimes neat, sometimes a childish scrawl. The spelling and grammar were intentionally poor, leading some to believe he was faking a lack of education to throw investigators off. He would include strange details, like bomb diagrams, which he threatened to use to blow up a school bus full of children. He created a scorecard of his supposed victims, updating the tally in his letters Zodiac, Dose, SFPD-0. He gave himself a name, created a logo, and built a mythology around himself. He was creating a supervillain persona, and he used the press as his free marketing department. There are still unsolved ciphers. 2 short ones, known as Z13 and Z32, remain mysteries. One of them, Z13, simply says, my name's followed by 13 symbols. Is his name really hidden in there? After the disappointment of the Z340, many are skeptical. It could be another red herring, another dead end designed to waste everyone's time. But the possibility, however faint, that his identity is locked in those symbols keeps people trying. That's the enduring power of the Zodiac's game. He designed it so that even decades after he likely died, we are still playing. In the end, the Zodiac killer's most powerful weapon wasn't a gun or a knife. It was a pen. Through his letters, he transformed a series of brutal, tragic murders into a national obsession and a piece of dark folklore. He controlled the narrative, terrorized the public, and immortalized himself as America's most famous unsolved mystery. He never got caught, and he made sure, through his ciphers and taunts, that we would never be able to forget him. For over half a century, one name has haunted California, a phantom who terrorized the public and taunted the police with cryptic messages. The Zodiac Killer, a name synonymous with mystery, fear, and an investigation that became the largest manhunt in California's history. But who was he? Today, we're diving deep into the labyrinth of suspects, obsession, and the false leads that have kept this case ice-cold for decades. It all began in the late 1960s. A series of brutal, seemingly random attacks rocked the San Francisco Bay Area. But the horror didn't stop with the crimes themselves. The killer began a chilling correspondence with the press, sending taunting letters and complex ciphers. He gave himself a name, the Zodiac. He craved attention, reveled in the fear he created, and claimed to have killed as many as 37 people. The police had a ghost on their hands, and a statewide panic was in full swing. The hunt was on, but the Zodiac was always one step ahead, leaving behind a trail of baffling clues and terrified communities. The investigation became a massive undertaking, drawing in detectives from multiple jurisdictions, handwriting experts, and cryptographers. Every clue was scrutinized, every witness statement analyzed, and from this mountain of information, a handful of names rose to the top, becoming the most famous suspects in this enduring mystery. Each man had a story, a set of circumstances that made him look tantalizingly like the killer, yet none could be definitively proven. Let's start with the most notorious suspect, Arthur Lee Allen. For many, Allen was the Zodiac. He was a convicted child molester and a disgraced former teacher who was in the right places at the right times. A former friend even told police that Allen had confessed his desire to hunt people who said the name Zodiac and owned a Zodiac brand watch. When police searched his trailer, they found weapons, bloody cannabis, and cryptic writings. The circumstantial evidence was staggering. He was a big man, matching one survivor's description. He wore the same boot size found at one crime scene. The coincidences piled up, making him the prime focus for decades. But here's the twist. For every piece of evidence pointing to Allen, there was another that cleared him. His fingerprints didn't match those found at the scenes. His handwriting, while showing some similarities, was ultimately not considered a match by most experts. And most damning of all, in the early 2000s, DNA was extracted from the saliva and the envelopes of the Zodiac letters. It was tested against Arthur Lee Allen's DNA. The result, no match. The man who seemed like the perfect fit was, according to science, not the killer. This bombshell threw the case wide open again, leaving investigators and amateur sleuths alike to ask, if it wasn't Allen, then who was it? With Allen seemingly out of the picture, attention turned to other possibilities. Enter Richard G., a journalist and editor for a counterculture newspaper called Good Times in San Francisco. The timeline is compelling. The Zodiac's letters stopped for a period, and it coincided with a time when Gakowski was out of the country. When he returned, the letters started up again. His work at the newspaper gave him access to the types of materials and the skills needed to create the Zodiac's complex ciphers and letters. Handwriting analysts have also found striking similarities between Gakowski's writing and the Zodiac's distinctive script. Some even claim his name can be found hidden within one of the ciphers. A former colleague also recalled Gakowski having a dark, violent temper. He would even shorten his last name in byleans to Gaik, which some have pointed out sounds eerily similar to a name mentioned by one of the killer's surviving victims. But like with Allen, the evidence is purely circumstantial. There's no physical proof, no smoking gun, just a web of coincidences that paint a suspicious but inconclusive picture. Gakowski passed away in 2004, taking any potential secrets with him to the grave. Then there's Lawrence Kane, sometimes known as Larry Kane. His name was brought up by a police officer who believed Kane was stalking one of the victims shortly before her murder. Kane had a history of run-ins with the law and worked in the Lake Tahoe area around the time of one of the Zodiac's potential abductions. He had a knack for changing his appearance and was described as being intelligent and manipulative. A sister of one of the victims even identified Kane from a photo lineup years after the crime as a man who had been following her sister. But again, the evidence chain breaks down. While suspicious, his connection is tenuous. His handwriting wasn't a match, and there was no physical evidence linking him to any of the crime scenes. He was investigated, questioned, but never charged. Like the others, he remains a person of interest. A ghost in the machine of the Zodiac investigation. Another dead end in a case full of them. This pattern repeats itself over and over. A promising lead emerges. The suspect's life is put under a microscope, but the final, definitive proof always remains just out of reach. The obsession with the Zodiac case isn't just confined to law enforcement. It has spawned a global community of amateur detectives, web sleuths, and armchair investigators. These individuals have spent countless hours, sometimes entire lifetimes, poring over every detail. They've analyzed the ciphers, debated the handwriting, and proposed their own theories and suspects. From newspaper archives to online forums, the hunt for the Zodiac continues, driven by a collective desire to put a face to the faceless killer. This public fascination has kept the case alive, but it has also muddied the waters, creating a whirlwind of speculation and misinformation. Modern technology was supposed to be the key to finally cracking the case. Advances in DNA analysis offered a glimmer of hope. In recent years, investigators have made new attempts to build a full DNA profile from the saliva on the envelopes. The same genetic genealogy techniques that caught the Golden State Killer were applied to the Zodiac case. The world held its breath, waiting for the announcement that the Zodiac had finally been identified. But the results were inconclusive. The DNA samples were old, degraded, and likely contaminated after being handled by so many people over the decades. What little DNA they could find was a partial profile, not enough to definitively identify a suspect or even rule one out completely. It was another frustrating setback. Technology had given them a powerful new tool, but the evidence itself was too compromised by time. The ghost remained a ghost. Handwriting analysis has been another central pillar of the investigation. The Zodiac's distinctive script is one of his most recognizable trademarks, but handwriting analysis is more of an art than a science. Different experts have looked at the same samples and come to wildly different conclusions. Some saw a clear match to Allen, others to Gaikowski, and still others saw no match to anyone. The subjective nature of the analysis means it can be used to support almost any theory, making it a powerful tool for confirmation bias, but a weak one for conclusive proof. So, where does that leave us? Decades later, with no confirmed killer, no final answer. The Zodiac case is a monument to the limits of investigation. It's a story of suspects who fit the profile, but were cleared by science, of promising leads that evaporated under scrutiny, and of an obsession that has spanned generations. Arthur Lee Allen, Richard Gaikowski, Lawrence Kane, they remain the most prominent names in a gallery of shadows, each a compelling what-if. The Zodiac created a puzzle he knew might never be solved. He fed on the chaos, on the public's fear and fascination. Perhaps that was his ultimate goal, not just to kill, but to create an enduring legend, a myth that would outlive him and everyone who hunted him. He remains California's greatest mystery, a chilling reminder that sometimes the monster gets away. The case is still officially open in several jurisdictions. A cold file waiting for that one breakthrough, that one piece of evidence that could finally end the hunt. Until then, the Zodiac's shadow looms large. For over half a century, one name has haunted the shadows of American true crime. The Zodiac, a phantom who terrorized Northern California, taunted police with cryptic letters, and then vanished. But what if the ghost in the machine wasn't a ghost at all? What if the answers we've been searching for are finally emerging, not from dusty old files, but from the digital ether? Today, we're diving deep into the modern hunt for the Zodiac Killer, exploring how technology, tireless citizen detectives, and new perspectives are breathing life into one of history's coldest cases. The story of the Zodiac is etched in fear. Between 1968 and 1969, he claimed at least 5 victims, though his own letters boasted of a chilling tally of 37. But it wasn't just the brutal, seemingly random attacks that cemented his infamy. It was his communication. He sent a series of bizarre, taunting letters to Bay Area newspapers, filled with ciphers and threats. He demanded his messages be published on the front page, or he would go on a kill rampage. He created a persona, assembled the crosshairs that became synonymous with terror. And then, after a final, disputed letter in 1974, the correspondence slowed to a trickle and eventually stopped. The Zodiac, the boogeyman of the Bay Area, simply disappeared. For decades, the case file grew thicker, filled with dead ends, false leads, and dozens of compelling, yet ultimately unproven, suspects. Men like Arthur Lee Allen, a convicted child molester who owned the same type of typewriter, wore the same size boots, and even made suspicious comments, became the face of the investigation for years. But physical evidence, like DNA and fingerprints, never provided a conclusive match. The case went cold, not for lack of effort, but for lack of technology. The ghost remained a ghost, but then the world changed. The rise of the internet created a new kind of detective agency, one that operates not out of a precinct, but from forums, message boards, and social media groups. Thousands of digital sleuths, armed with search engines and a passion for puzzles, began to re-examine every shred of evidence. They cross-referenced old city directories, digitized newspaper archives, and debated every nuance of the Zodiac's handwriting and psychological profile. This global, decentralized effort brought fresh eyes to a case that had been stared at for so long it had become blurry. One of the most significant barriers in the Zodiac case was always his ciphers. Of the 4 he sent, only one, the 408-character cipher, was solved in 1969 by a schoolteacher and his wife. It was a rambling, misspelled message about the thrill of the hunt. But the most notorious one, the 340 cipher, remained a stubborn enigma for 51 years. It taunted and frustrated cryptographers, both amateur and professional. It was considered the holy grail of the Zodiac mystery. Then, in December 2020, the impossible happened. A team of 3 citizen codebreakers from 3 different countries. David Orn, a web designer from the US, Sam Bleck, a mathematician from Australia, and Jarl Van Ack, a programmer from Belgium. Using custom-built software and thousands of hours of work, they untangled the Zodiac's complex transpositional key. The message was as chilling as everyone had feared. It read, "I hope you are having lots of fun in trying to catch me. I am not afraid of the gas chamber because it will send me to paradise all the sooner because I now have enough slaves to work for me." The misspelling of paradise was classic Zodiac. The message didn't reveal his name, but it shattered the half-century of silence from the cipher itself. It proved that with modern computing power and sheer human persistence, the Zodiac's secrets were not unbreakable. This breakthrough reinvigorated the entire community. If the 340 could be solved, what else was possible? This new momentum has also influenced the world of forensic science. When the Zodiac was active, DNA analysis was the stuff of science fiction. Investigators relied on fingerprints, blood typing, and eyewitness accounts. But today, forensic genealogy, same technique used to identify the Golden State Killer, offers a tantalizing possibility. The Zodiac licked stamps and envelopes, leaving behind his genetic blueprint. While early attempts to extract a full DNA profile from the aging glue were difficult, advances in technology are making it more and more feasible. Labs can now work with degraded or minuscule samples, amplifying tiny fragments of DNA to build a genetic profile. This profile can then be uploaded to public genealogy databases like GEDmatch, searching for distant relatives of the contributor. From there, investigators can build a family tree and narrow down the search to a specific individual. It's a painstaking process, a digital ghost hunt through generations of birth and death certificates, but it's no longer a fantasy. Several cold cases, even older than the Zodiac's, have been solved this way. The question is no longer if we can get the Zodiac's DNA, but when and from which piece of evidence. The ghost in the files might just have a genetic signature. With all this new activity, the old questions remain. Who was he, and why did he stop? The theories are as numerous as the suspects. One of the most practical theories is that he simply died. If the Zodiac was in his late 20s or 30s during his crimes, he would be well into his 70s or 80s today, if not older. He could have died from natural causes, an accident, or even at the hands of someone else, taking his secret to the grave. Another theory is that he was incarcerated for an unrelated crime. A long prison sentence would certainly explain the abrupt halt to his public terror campaign. Investigators have scoured prison records for individuals with similar profiles, but with thousands of potential candidates across the country, it's a monumental task. Perhaps the most unsettling theory is that he just stopped. The psychological motivations of serial offenders are complex. For some, the compulsion to kill can fade, be replaced by other obsessions, or become too risky to continue. The Zodiac was a narcissist who craved attention. Perhaps the media attention waned, or he had a close call with law enforcement that scared him straight. He might have moved away, started a new life, and blended back into society, becoming a quiet neighbor, a co-worker, a family man, leaving the monster he created locked in the past. He won his game, in a sense, by simply walking off the board. And then there are the modern suspects. While Arthur Lee Allen remains a popular figure in Zodiac lore, the advent of digital investigation has brought new names into the spotlight. One such person of interest, Gutty Francis Poster, was named by a group of private investigators called the Casebreakers in 2021. They claim to have forensic evidence and eyewitness testimony. Lincoln Post, who passed away in 2018, to the Cremus. Oh, we've Law enforcement agencies like the FBI and the San Francisco Police Department have stated that the case remains officially unsolved and have not confirmed these findings. This highlights the ongoing tension between official investigations and the passionate, sometimes speculative, world of citizen detectives. So, where does that leave us? The Zodiac case is no longer a static, dusty file. It's a dynamic, evolving investigation being fought on two fronts. The forensic lab and the digital world. The ghost that haunted California for decades is now being pursued by a new generation of hunters, armed with tools the original investigators could only dream of. The 2020 Cipher solution proved that persistence pays off, and forensic genealogy holds the promise of a definitive answer. Will we ever know the Zodiac's name? It's impossible to say for sure, but for the first time in a long time, it feels like we're closer than ever. The ghost left a trail, and now we finally have the technology to follow it. The final chapter of the Zodiac story may not have been written by him, but by the relentless pursuit of truth that he, himself, set in motion. The hunt is still on. Thanks for watching.